Happy New Year, everyone. I just want to throw a big shout out to everybody that's been affected by the fires. Here in Australia, it's been the worst fire season that we've ever seen. This is just a photo from my kitchen window, actually. Roughly sort of about 9 o'clock-ish in the morning. And you can see the sun is sort of pretty well darkened out. There is a couple of photos that I've got here which are similar. Here's another photo. Sun's sort of darkened out by smoke. This is roughly about sort of 4 o'clock-ish in the afternoon. We've seen some terrible fire seasons, but this one is by far the worst. 27 people confirmed dead. Millions and millions and millions of animals, estimated to be 500,000 animals. I would say probably more. Anyway, thoughts out to everybody, and let's try and be positive, even though it's not looking very positive for the poor people that have been affected. Entire towns wiped out, thousands and thousands of houses, the whole lot. So it's terrible. Anyway, I want to focus on something positive. Humans are going to have to, and we will have no choice, and look, it's the only sensible thing to do. Humans are going to have to move to electricity in the future. We have no choice, and this is, the fossil fuels, the nuclear, all that sort of thing, it's all got to go. We have to go to electricity. Solar and wind will be a part of the solution, but cannot be all of the solution. Solar will be no good, obviously, in fire situations when the sun is almost blackened out. So unfortunately, solar is only good for so much. Solar can't do it all. However, magnetic fields are universal. Magnetic fields and electric fields are one. Electromagnetic field, or electrodynamics. So we need to be a bit smarter about things, and we need to look at solutions that can move us forward. Now, our solution, the solution that we've come up with and had for some time, that people are starting to catch on to. Many people doing very, very good replications are seeing the results, and to be perfectly honest, I think, like I did, I think a lot of people are not quite seeing the whole picture. Now, a magnetic field is something that we know from electromagnetism and Faraday's law of electromagnetic induction and so on and so forth, that we know that a magnetic field that changes in time in the proximity of a conductor creates an EMF, which is a voltage. Now, voltage is not a current, and the Faraday's law of electromagnetic induction does not predict current. It has nothing to do with current. The current is entirely predicted by Ohm's law, which is I equals V over R. So the voltage through the resistance determines the current. Now, with any coil of wire, we've got to consider the what would be the AC resistance of the wire, which is the impedance. And impedance is normally has the letter Z, capital Z, as the symbol. And impedance is made up from reactance, which is capacitive, and is also inductive. So there's two sides. Now, capacitive reactance is something that is more dominant, I should say, before the resonant frequency, and inductive reactance is something that happens after the resonant frequency. Basically, the inductive reactance is a forcing function that the faster the frequency in the coil, so the faster the time rate of change of the magnetic field, the more electromagnetic induction which is generated in the opposite direction. So basically what that means is it means that we've got two rivers, and each river is trying to force its water down a very small channel, and they're both moving in opposite directions. Now, obviously, if the river is enclosed, which a wire is via the insulation, then the river can't force any current anywhere else but down the middle of the wire. Okay, so if we've got one current going one way and then another current trying to go the opposite way, it's going to create a big resistance, and that basically is the impedance. The impedance in the wire is the resistance of the current to flow. Now, when a current can flow, it will normally flow faster, and always flow faster in fact, via a low resistance path. So the maximum current will always travel the lowest resistance path. So if we have a very high resistance, which is, as I've just explained, is the same as the impedance. So if we have a very high impedance, then the current's not going to want to flow. Okay, it's resisted, it's blocked from flowing. Now what we've got to realize is that the technology that we're sharing is entirely dependent on that very fact. So what we want is we want the currents in the wires to be able to change as quickly as we possibly can get them to change. And if they resist, if it's resisted, if the currents can't change quickly enough, then the currents are not going to, the coils are not going to function very well together. Okay, so the entire point of this video, and it's really just a sort of to try and clear things up, is to try and explain a couple of things in the videos. Now, first of all, I'm going to show you just a quick bit here. CD Sharp, fantastic replications, been doing lots and lots and lots of really good replications for a long time. And this is the asymmetrical regauging that you can see here. Okay, this is something that we've been talking about, we've looked at for a long time. CD, spot on track, absolutely 100% spot on. However, I just want to point out, this is a post here in response to Addy. Addy's done some really good work, and he's replicated some of the results here, but I can see that there's a little bit of confusion, how I used to be confused in what Addy's trying to do. So Addy's got a couple of input coils here that he's sort of showing. So there's input coils he's showing, but the output coils are really not. It's a case of perhaps not really sort of thinking about what the currents are doing in the coils together as a whole. So we're sort of more so looking at one coil and then focusing on another coil and then focusing on another coil. Whereas what we've got to do to understand this is we've got to put all three coils together. Okay, now I'll just go through very quickly. 3 is the magic number, okay, and the turns, so if we had 10 turns with 1 ampere, that is, was it 10 times 1 is 10, and because we're dealing in turns, that's a magnetomotive force which is equivalent to the ampere turns, okay, which is 10, because we've got 10 turns with 1 ampere. So 1 times 10 is 10, and the magnetomotive force is equivalent to the current through the turns. So the magnetomotive force is the current in the coils. Okay, and remember from previous videos in the series, remember we've shown how the current ramps up. So it normally ramp up in a exponential curve. Okay, now when we're dealing with asymmetry, and that's what this thread is about. Okay, so action, reaction, and counter-reaction. So we're dealing with action, which is the primary coil, reaction, which is the secondary coil, counter-reaction, which is the tertiary coil. So counter-reaction and reaction are the partnered output coils, and action is the input coil. Okay, now we've sort of gone through too many turns is bad. Why is too many turns bad? Because we have too much impedance. The impedance between the coils, it makes it too slow for the coils to react. And remember, it's the reaction between the coils that brings up our asymmetrical regauging. Okay, and remember we've got to get to a very high potential as quickly as we can get, and remember to get as quickly as we can get to a peak, we've got to have low impedance. Remember what we talked about before. So if there's two rivers and they're flowing into each other, one's going to resist the other, and it's not going to let the flow of water dissipate. So we're dealing with a happy balance. Okay, so if we've got too many turns, it's bad. If we haven't got enough turns, it's also bad. So we need just the right number of turns to make sure that the magnetic fields can react quickly enough together to get the voltage up, which is the potential. Okay, and once the potential's up, then when we turn our input off, the potential's got to do something. It's got to dissipate, fall back to entropy. So if we can sort of follow the theme of what I've tried to say here, we're breaking symmetry. Okay, this guy Jim Gates, very, very smart man, really smart bloke. The magic happens when you break symmetry. Okay, symmetry, for example, is a transformer. We have an input coil, we have an output coil. Okay, the two coils, they interact together. The symmetry means that the magnetic field from the primary coil is mirrored on the secondary coil, but the output is the input less losses. Now every system has losses, and if it's a symmetrical system, by the time you take the losses away, you're always going to be below unity. You can never go above unity in a symmetrical system. Okay, because again, the input is the output less losses. So to get above unity, you've got to go to an asymmetrical system, which basically is the imbalance of geometry. Okay, so if we have an input coil and an output coil, then that's our symmetry. But if we introduce another output coil, then that's going to break that symmetry. Again, broken symmetry is where the magic happens. So if we break the symmetry, then the symmetry will allow for extra energy to come into the system, because we have encouraged a forcing function, because we've got potential. As soon as we get potential in the system, there's a forcing function there that must dissipate energy until that potential has fallen back to equilibrium. Okay, it's got to. It's just the laws of nature. It's how it works. We can never ever get more energy out of a symmetrical system, but we can in an asymmetrical system, and that's why. Okay, so the magic happens when you break symmetry. Very smart man, worth going to have a listen to that. Now again, this is not the first time we've been told this. Tom Bearden's been telling us, well, 20 years at least, if not even more. 1995, I would say that this interview probably is roughly the date. I don't know for sure, but even more. Floyd Sweet used to talk about it in some of his work as well. Now it's not new, okay? So everything I'm sharing with you is stuff that I've learned, and it's stuff that I've learned where it fits. And how have I learned that? I've learned where it fits by getting on the bench and doing the experiments. And I think that's really important. Now we've seen in our forum, we've seen some of the guys do some really good experiments. And the more experiments they do, the better they get. And I've seen it time and time again. So some of the guys are doing fantastic work, but it is really hard to tie these little sort of things together. Okay, so what do we? Eddie's done a couple of experiments there. He's starting to get some, sort of some effects sort of happening there. Starting to look pretty good now. Eddie's he's done some really good work, and almost identically replicated the waveforms. And it sort of seems to me that he's moved away from that device and moved on to something else, which also is something that I've had problems with as well. And what I'd like to say is, once you start seeing these effects, concentrate on the effects and learn as much as you can from them, because these effects are where the path lays. And if you diverge from that path, if you fall off the path, then it's very hard to find your way back to the path again, if that makes sense. You sort of got to go back to basics, and by going back to basics means you have to replicate the original experiment again and then sort of move forward from there, which sort of a lot of going around in circles. Okay, so what we talked about before was symmetry. Now, if there was symmetry here, and if we were to look at symmetry in the form of a weight, okay, so the weight on this side of the scale were to equal the weight on this side of the scale, then the scale would sit level. Okay, the weights would be the same. This visual indicator here would be in the middle. Okay, and the weight on each side would be equal but opposite. Okay, so one's trying to push down on this side, one's trying to push down on this side because of gravity, but because the weights are equal, they cancel each other out, so therefore they sit level. Alright, the same thing is true in MMF. MMF again is the current through the turns of the coil, which is equivalent to the ampere turns. It basically means the same thing. If you go through and if you have a look at the fundamental quantities and what these things are measured in, they all come out to the same thing. It's the current through the turns. MMF and ampere turns and everything else, it all comes out. It sounds very complicated, but if you go through it one step at a time, if you take my word for it, they come out the same. So even though they are talked about differently, they are still the same thing, same quantity. Alright, so it's about balance, but how do we find that balance? You know, in an asymmetrical system, we don't have balance, or do we? Yes, we do, because in an asymmetrical system, we still have two output coils. So if one output coil on this side had the same MMF, but in an opposite direction to the output coil on this side, then the bar would still sit level, and our input coil would be a third coil, which would be the actual asymmetry in the system, 1, 2, 3. So you can't have symmetry with 3. There's no such thing. 3 is the magic number. So if we had a third coil, then we would have to rely on the two partnered output coils to have the same MMF, which would actually cancel each other, which is the same as the famous picture that we've been looking at for ages, which is this. So again, output coil, and a gold one over here, output coil, and then the green one, our input coil. So asymmetry, the magnetic field from the primary coil is magnetic field 1, magnetic field 2 is from this output coil, magnetic field 3 is from this output coil over here. And you'll remember in the past, and you'll see from the diagram, that the two magnetic fields from this output coil and this output coil must oppose each other. Okay, so the magnetic north vector potential is pointing in on this side, magnetic north vector potential on this side is pointing in as well. So the magnetic fields from this coil and this coil have to oppose each other. So that's where our symmetry lays in the system. We still have symmetry in an asymmetrical system, but the problem is because of our third coil, our third coil doesn't see the symmetry. Our third coil is not exposed to, not directly at least anyway, the symmetry that must be in most systems. And you'll remember from some of the Richard Feynman stuff, he actually says that not everything in nature is symmetrical. There is asymmetry in nature, and also Jim Gates talks about it as well. The magic happens when you break symmetry. It's been something that's spoken about a lot. Richard Feynman termed the coins, or at least Richard Feynman used the terms left-handed and right-handed, which basically means the symmetry. Now I forget exactly, but I think it's symmetry that has a symmetry that might have a right-handed coil, and then asymmetry that has a left-handed. I think that might be the way it works, but don't. I might be wrong. Anyway, so we're looking at asymmetrical system, and I've said this for a long time now. Tom Bedden said it before me. So this coil here and this coil here have to have the same MMF, and the MMF needs to oppose each other. Okay, and the input coil, all that's doing is allowing this coil here and this coil here to react in a time that basically that one coil sees the other coil as its primary. Okay, so the change in magnetic field in this coil induces an EMF on this coil, and vice versa. The EMF that's induced in this coil is because the magnetic field changing in this coil. And this is something we've been through many times before as well. Now, here comes something that is a little bit tricky. If the magnetic field is not changing fast enough in these coils, e.g. if there's too much impedance, or e.g. if, say for example, one of the coils is not loaded, or another situation, it may not have enough load on it. Say for example, we have a load that's drawing only 1 milliampere, and we're not seeing enough current in the coil for the reactions in the coil, the action, reaction and counter reaction in the coil to have enough effects. Then if we don't get the balance right here, then the system won't work properly. Okay, and remembering this is all to do with the MMF, which is the current flowing through the turns. Okay, if we don't have enough current flowing through the turns, then this system won't work. Okay, so we have to have a certain amount of current flowing through the turns. And I want to show you a quick quote, because I think this is important. Okay, some time ago in my research, you can probably understand I have spent a lot of time sitting down, reading, studying, trying to verify facts. This is pretty much what I spent the first portion of my research doing. So I went through every piece of paper that I could find. I've read, I've tried to memorize most of it, and there's certain things that stick out. This is a quote from one of Walt Rosenthal's papers. The VTA likes to always see a minimum load of 25 watts. Now that's a statement that really sort of sticks out, and you've got to ask the question, why would a statement like that be made? What is the point of making sure that we have 25 watts at an absolute minimum running through the VTA? You've got to ask the question, you've got to think is, well, hang on a minute here. If 25 watts at 120 volts VRMS, 60 Hertz, how much current is that? Okay, how much current is that at 25 watts? So we've got to sort of think, well, the current flowing through the coils in the VTA is a necessity. I mean, voltage is only a potential. We can have voltage and the voltage will do nothing. But what's the current doing? And it's doing exactly what we've just talked about. The current flowing through the coils is a forcing function for electromagnetic induction. And the time rate of change of the current in the proximity of another coil can induce an EMF, and that EMF can then allow for a current to flow through that coil. Now, to bring asymmetry into a system, that's exactly what we need. We need that to happen. Otherwise we can't have asymmetry. So we start to see a little bit of a closing of the loop. We start to see some concepts start to make sense. So if we go back to our asymmetrical system here, and if we were to look at the scale, okay, if we were to say that one partnered output coil here and one partnered output coil here are in balance, then our top crossbar would be vertical. That means that the magnetic field on one coil would be equal and opposite to the magnetic field on the other coil, which then gives us a system that, like in the diagram before, we have two arrows pointing in opposite directions, which gives us a standing wave. That's the typical standing wave that most everybody is familiar with now. So the forcing function that we just talked about would mean that for the MMF here and the MMF over here to be equal and opposite, that there is a certain action-reaction series that we have to count on to make sure that this happens. And if this doesn't happen, then our system's not working properly. We haven't done enough to get our system working better, that we can get the vertical bar to balance vertically. Okay? And remember, this is all about the MMF. MMF is the current through the turns, the magnetomotive force. Okay, this is what the magnetomotive force is, the torque on a generator shaft. It's what puts the input current up on the input side on a transformer, and it's basically any symmetrical system. It's the opposition of force in the symmetrical system. Okay, so remember from our talk before, from what we said before, in any symmetrical system, the input is equal to the output less losses. And the same is true here, because our partnered output coils, so one coil is equal to the MMF on the other coil less losses. Okay, and the same is true the other way. So our output here is equal and opposite to this one less losses. Okay, so the same is true both ways. Now, what we talked about, again, the magic happens when we break symmetry, and we talked about summarizing and trying to sort of understand, and this is a reason for this video. The reason for this video is to understand what the coils are doing in time is very, very important. For example, if we were to look at a crane, let's pull up a picture of a crane. So in a crane, there's a counterbalancing weight that is added to the crane. So we might lift maybe, let's say a ton over here on these cables over here, and to counter the 1 ton downward force, we have a 1 ton downward force on this side as well. So it's a little bit like the scale. Our central point is obviously the middle of the crane, and here, which is the swivel, that's the swivel point where it can spin around. But the thing is that there is a force here which is equal and opposite. So the counterbalancing force is equal and opposite to the counterbalancing force that are on the cables over here. So the same sort of rules apply, and if we are going to deal with any force, then we want to try and counter it to a certain degree. We want to make sure that we're not lifting 10 tons over here or whatever it be without any help. 10 tons lifting by ourselves would be extremely hard, whereas if we've got 10 tons over here, then the counterbalancing of the weight sort of adds to less stress on the system. And that's the sort of point of what I've been trying to show. You can see the implementation here of partnered output coils. So the top one being one partnered output coil, the bottom coil under here being another partnered output coil with the input coil wrapped over the top of it. Input coil coming in from behind, and then the two partnered output coils coming out the front. So it's about balance. So to offset, if you like, to counterbalance the direct force on the input coil from one of the output coils. Okay, so coming back to our symmetry in a transformer, the transformer is symmetrical, so the input coil is directly opposed by the output coil, which is two coils. So to counteract that, we have a third coil, and the third coil, if it opposes the first primary coil, then the third coil must add to the MMF on the primary coil. So it's assistive. So 1, 2, 3, if we were to look at our equation, so we have 1 plus -1 plus 1 equals 1. In a transformer, if we were to look at that symmetrically, we would have 1 plus -1, which is 0. So we have nothing left over in a symmetrical transformer. So everything is consumed, the MMF was. Whereas in MMF wise, if we were to look at this system, because it's asymmetrical, because we have three magnetic fields all working together all at the same time, and because the symmetry is between our output coils, our two output coils, then the asymmetry is not reflected directly back on the input coil. So we have symmetry between one output coil and the other output coil, but asymmetry between the input coil and the two output coils. Again, so 1 plus negative 1 plus 1 equals 1. Now this is just something that I should point out, is something that Andrei Malenchenko pointed out many years ago, back in around about the 2000, year 2000 roughly, possibly even a little bit before, and we've shown that to be 100% correct. He was on target, spot on. Okay, so this is the input coil that I was showing everybody. Q1 is the switching MOSFET, the input signal to the switching MOSFET. We show a diode here, which is also an internal diode in most MOSFETs. Not all MOSFETs have internal diodes, but most of them do. And this is to allow current to travel back to the source. Okay, if we had no diode here, when the MOSFET is off, the input coil does not allow for current to move back to the source, which is fairly important in most of these machines. So L1, whoop, I've got a new mouse and it's flying all over the show. It's a bit of a pain. Of all things, it's a Logitech. Normally Logitech's pretty good, but this one's a bit horrible. So L1 is the same as L1 here. Okay, so same circuits, just drawn differently. Notice the dot conventions here. So from VE plus, when L1 is on, the current is flowing through the coil like that, conventionally. Okay, we're not talking about the other way, we're talking about conventional current. Conventional current, okay, equal and opposite, L2 opposes, so the dot convention, current has to flow that way. Okay, and then look at the dot on this one, it's opposite. So this coil here opposes this coil here on the same core, so current has to come out this way and flow that way. Alright, now asymmetrical regauging. We've talked about this for ages, we've seen it time and time again. People have told us about it before. Seems to me that it's largely overlooked by people, and I think that's a real shame, because to be perfectly honest, if people had paid more attention to this, then we'd probably be further ahead than what we really are. This is so important, it really is. The Meg guys, okay, this is their diagram, this is their output diagram, input here, okay, so these are their inputs, very short, sharp duty cycle, what is it, I think we worked it out to roughly about 10%. This is the output, okay, remember we talked that this is upside down, it should be the other way up, so these peaks here should be up here instead of down there, and these peaks here should be down here instead of up there. And this is asymmetrical regauging. Remember the Meg guys have talked about one build-up producing more than 100 times the output. Well, it's true. Anyone that cares to do some real science and put their mind to some very important information will see that. Don Smith told us the same thing, exact same thing. Sawtooth pattern to pulsed DC. Okay, this is exactly what these machines are doing.
See, there we go. Okay, you see the L1 coil here. It's 3-inch Baker-Williamson coil. It's had the 4 turns taken out of the center here, and they're made into a pigtail, which forms the the negative ground out, or the amperage end of the deal. On the ends here, they're coming off and going out and coming through. This is a series of very high voltage capacitors that are normally found in flyback transformer circuits and televisions. So we're into very high voltage on those diodes. And basically what they're doing is what the two diodes were doing in the other device. They're taking a sawtooth pattern and changing it into a flat pulsating DC.
So all in all, I've been trying for years to get this information out to people. I've been trying for years to get people to follow. We have had some successes. There's been quite a few people on the forum that have replicated, some that have reported some pretty good results. But the same old story, because of history and because of what history has done to us, we're all a little bit fearful of coming forward in quantity. Even I've been a little bit fearful of coming forward. I've been very cautious, shall we say, in what I've done. I've planned out meticulously a plan that has very, very slowly tried to get people involved, to show people what I've learnt over the years. And I'm still learning even now. So I'm not an expert, and I don't ever expect to be an expert, but I'm always willing to learn. However, what I do know is I know the fact that these machines do work. These machines have been reported many times through history. Some people, like Don Smith, like Andrei Malenchenko, have shared much more information than what others have. Some have hidden information. Floyd Sweet, unfortunately, was very reluctant to give away proper information. Gave away a little bit, but was very secretive. I understand people being secretive to a certain degree, but unfortunately, keeping something like this secretive will never help anybody. Never. Not even the person that keeps the secrets. Unfortunately, those people all end up dying, taking the secrets to the grave, and very rarely do they ever help anybody on the planet, ever. And that's a shame, because really at the end of the day, we all have the same coloured blood running through our veins. We're all part of one species. We all have DNA that essentially makes us one. So it's sad, in light of all the catastrophes that have been happening throughout the globe lately, with the fires, with everything else that's been happening. This year's been one of the hottest years on record again. We've broken records like not before. It's about time we human beings started getting our act together and making a real difference. Otherwise we will very soon be extinct, and I don't want to become extinct. I'm going to put up a fight, and I'm going to try and make a difference. So I ask that you do as well. What I have given you, what I've shared with you, can be verified one stage after the next, after the next, after the next, and just some of the replications on our forum show this. CD's contributions have been fantastic. Again, his latest video shows exactly the replication of what we've been showing. Captain Loz, some of his work has been fantastic. This is a PCB that I sent out to 3 selected members of the forum for free. So I'm trying to get everybody involved by giving people what I can afford to give myself, and these people are doing fantastic work. So I urge all of you, every single person that watches this video, come and join us, come and be part of something better, and move away from our antiquated thinking that this can't be done. because I'm telling you right now it can be done. We've been told millennia now that even in the old records of Plato and all that, that energy is everywhere. Nikola Tesla has told us that. Everybody has told us that. It's everywhere. So let me just try and very quickly see. Now, just for a real quick one, just while we're here, there's been successes, there's been failures. I still have failures even now. So, you know, hold your head high. Learn from every failure, learn from every success. Not everything that you do is going to be a success, but you'll find that most people will have successes. Again, where is it? Let's see if I can very quickly find the list of people that have done successful replications. Now, there's lots of advice I've tried to give over the past, in the past, and I think sometimes I've confused people, sometimes I haven't. But I hope that we are making steps forward. This is Captain Loz's work, fantastic work as well. I'm not sure if we can find the. This is Addy's original work, very, very good. Remember, powers the area under a curve, and if we're dealing with a 10% on time, this is on time here, then that 10% on time there is the current that's being supplied to the input coil to make these machines work. So that costs us 10%. Okay, and all this area over here, all of that area and that triangle there is output, but also we have output from our input coils here as well. So all of this area under the curve is output for a very, very small amount of input. The guys have done fantastic work. This is something that I so wish that people would join in and, you know, become part of, work with us on it. You know, we're all one. Let's make this work. Let's make it work for everybody instead of just a few. And again, you know, there is a list here somewhere of people that have successfully replicated the work here. Some have shown some excellent results and reported some excellent results. This is from Jagao. Jagao, again, he's replicated exactly 100% spot on. Here it is here. So same waveforms, same results. You know, look at the light on that light. You know, there's lots of people on the forum that have replicated it. I'm trying to urge everybody to get into it. Again, just very quickly, part of this video, the time rate of change of the magnetic field in the proximity of another conductor is what generates the EMF. Okay, so EMF here, voltage. EMF is measured in quantities of volts. Okay, amperes is dependent on the resistance of the coil, and that's not just the DC resistance, it's the AC resistance. So like we talked about earlier, that's the reactance of the coil and all that sort of thing as well. So it all plays a role. So the bigger the core, the less the turns, the thicker the wire gauge, the faster the magnetic field changing in time. Now let me try and explain this better. So our 10% on time here, that determines the time rate of change of the magnetic fields between the two partnered output coils. So what it's doing is it's changing the magnetic field very, very fast in the partnered output coils, and this very, very fast change in magnetic field determines the voltage, which is the amplitude here. So if we were able to accurately design a machine that gave us, let's say, 20 volts, okay, then the time rate of change within this 10% duty cycle here would give us a top, or at least a peak voltage of 20 volts. Okay, let's say we're able to accurately design that, which unfortunately I don't have all the equations. It's fiddling, it's work, it takes a bit of time, but we can get there eventually. Okay, so what our input coil is doing here our input coil is creating the time rate of change between the two partnered output coils. It's not supplying a magnetic field directly as part of the output. The output comes from the two partnered output coils, 1, 2, opposing each other. And that's why we can get so much extra output on the back end over here for a very, very short input over here. Okay, so it's something very important to think about. So the time rate of change of this partnered output coil here compared to this one over here is what generates the voltage, and that's the peak. Okay, so that's the peak up here. So this is the regauge period. Okay, so we regauge for a very short time. We try and get our voltage up, and then our voltage drops down over time. I should say we gain energy. Okay, the gain in energy in these systems is a function of the time that's off. Okay, so the longer the off time and the longer that the partnered output coils have to react with each other, and that they do react with each other, the more energy we gain. It's pumping current. So this coil pumps current in this coil pumps current in this coil, and all our input coil is doing is getting the magnetic fields up as quickly as possible. And that's why we see such a short sharp on time. Okay, same deal with all the Don Smith stuff. Okay, if you follow the right hand rule, use the right hand grip rule, same deal. Now it doesn't look like I can find the list at the moment, but there is a list anywhere on the forum. I think there's about 6 or 7 different people that have replicated it. So I just want to say, look, please join in. Come be part of something better. Let's work towards a better future rather than a worse one. There's lots and lots of terrible things going on in the world, with fires, with everything else. Let's make a difference. Now, if this video has helped you, please consider a donation as well. We are entirely funded, mostly from my own pocket. Some very generous people have given money in the past, and I want to shout out huge thank you to them. So thank you very much for helping us out. With the more work that we do, hopefully we can change the world for better. Thanks very much.